I eat that already? Man, I'm still hungry. I showed in a previous video, which I will link to here, just how it is sometimes possible to purchase a lower quality cut, already cut, blue topaz gemstones at what essentially are the same price as a blue topaz rough. So rough and cut stones, same price. Kind of a myth buster video. When you find these opportunities, which are out there, you are able to buy what is essentially, I use for a pre-formed piece of rough to recut. This significantly increases the rate of return on the weight because the stone's already preformed. And as well, it has the advantage that you're able to much more accurately examine the preform to see the color, which is the most important factor in determining the price of a gemstone, as well as being able to see any inclusions or internal issues in the stone that's already been cut. So a couple of years ago, while I was in Tucson for the annual Gem Show, or more accurately, Gem Shows, as there are dozens of shows in Tucson at the same time annually, I came across this native cut blue topaz gemstone. Now surprisingly, I found this very large gemstone. It measured 31.9 by 26.5 millimeters, very large. I found it at what is arguably the second most upscale gem show in Tucson, the GJX show. It's just my opinion, but it is at the AGTA show and the GJX show in Tucson where you'll see the most number of amazing cut gemstones there are. Of course, there's exceptions, and at any of the gem shows, you're likely to find some remarkably cut gemstones. It's just that you'll find many, many more at these two shows. Again, it's just my opinion based on years of going to Tucson. Just as a way of further kind of explaining what I mean, it's at the GJX show that you'll discover a whole entire section of the GJX tent just for the world famous Eder Oberstein cutters to show their awesome gemstones. So a lot of nice gemstones there. So it was while visiting this venue, and I was looking at one of the upscale sellers from Topaz. He had a large supply of topaz. They were someone that had just a killer color that just took my breath away. So I had to stop and examine some of those, especially larger stones. Hey, who doesn't like looking at the large gemstones, right? Well, I was looking at this particularly large gemstone, and I noticed that the entire bottom portion was very cloudy, heavily included. And what I think happened, there's no way to know for sure, but just what I think is that this vendor had purchased a large amount of topaz rough, and he then had his own commercial cutter sources, and they cut all that rough into gemstones just in preparation for the show. Well, I think, just again, just my opinion, in trying to maximize yield, it's what he told his cutters to do. The cutter left this cloudy mess in the bottom of this gemstone. I know it was a huge disappointment for the vendor. I suspect he had just received all the cut gemstones back from his commercial cutters just in time to get them to the U.S. in time for the Tucson show. His other gemstones were awesome, and he appeared to be having a good show and selling well, so he was doing okay, but from what I saw, this was the worst gemstone, probably the only bad gemstone he had. Color, excellent. Size, huge. Clarity, excellent, except for the bottom where it was a train wreck. And both the vendor and I knew that the customers who frequent this particular show, which is a large percentage jewelers, not a whole lot of cutters. There's some, but they don't sell a lot of rough at this show. It's mostly finished goods, cut gemstones. There is some rough dealers, but not generally. So with the vendors who are coming here, I think he knew they were not going to buy this stone, period. So I made him an offer, and surprisingly to me, he was happy to let this stone go after a little bit of arguing, but at a considerable discount. So I suspect he did recoup his rough cost. I suspect he buys rough in such large quantities that he gets an excellent price. He may even own the topaz mine, who knows. So I ended up getting this gemstone for about the same price that many rough dealers sell topaz for. And I'm not saying the rough dealers are pricing topaz wrong, they're not. But as I previously learned, sometimes it's possible to buy a cut, a native cut, commercially cut topaz stone for less or at the same price as topaz rough. Again, the advantage of doing this, for me, I already know the final cut will be a killer color. Look at that vivid blue. I know that by cleaning up the mess in the pavilion, it'll be a clean stone. So we just got to get rid of this cloudy stuff in the bottom. So as I examine the stone, and I've been occasionally pulling it out of my inventory to examine over the last couple of years, I go into my inventory and look at the stones I have and think about what to do with them. And I continue to see it's a very deep Pavilion, and actually too deep. Stone's too heavy to me. So I figured, is there a way that I can reduce the depth of the Pavilion and cut away all the junk and end up with a large oval topaz, about the same length and width as the current stone is? That's what I'd like to do. Keep the length and the width, make it a nice stone. So let's find out if I can do it. So keep your fingers crossed. This type of cutting, this native cutting, is standard in the jewelry industry for commercially cut gemstones. Again, we call it a native cut. It doesn't mean that the commercial cutters do a poor job. To the contrary, many foreign cutters are world-class cutters, better than I will ever be. They can look at a stone, they'll adjust one side to the other side to work through an issue, things I couldn't do, and make the stone look okay. They maximize the yield, make slight adjustments on the fly. They're not untalented. So in this case, I don't know how they left that mess in the bottom of the Pavilion. Glad they did. It was a win for me. But this cutting is the standard. It is what you'll see in many, many, many jewelry stores. I made a video of my poor man video system when I started making these videos, and I'll link to that here. And I decided early on, instead of paying hundreds or thousands of dollars for a super macro zoom lens for my camera, I opted to spend about $20 for a set of magnifying filters, which you just screw onto your basic lens. And if I put them all together, I can get up to an additional 17 times magnification than the magnification which already comes with my basic lens, which isn't bad. The basic lens comes with some magnification. So the set I purchased, it has a 10K, 10 times, 4 times, 2 times, and 1 time magnification filter. And you can attach them all together or individually to your camera lens. And when you put them all together, it's an additional 17 times magnification. So I do keep promising myself that I'll upgrade my video equipment, but in the end, I always end up spending my budget on rocks, and I bet you do too. But at Tucson, or at Franklin, at the U.S. Fasteners Guild in Franklin, I did see a not expensive little camera that I'd like to pick up in the future, and maybe I can make my videos a little bit better, show the cutting from the other side of the machine, maybe. So again, there's nothing wrong with this gemstone other than the mess in the Pavilion. So if you visit jewelry stores, and when you do, I'd encourage you to examine their colored gemstones. For the most part, you'll find that this is the quality of the cuts that you're going to find, and I'd call this average. Of course, there are jewelry stores that have exceptional gemstones. That's where mine go to. That's where if you're a cutter, that's probably where yours are going to. But my point is, this is acceptable within the jewelry industry. I'm not trying to knock it. If you look at the cut, what you'll see is little brush strokes on the facets. They could have been polished away if the cutter had taken the time, or in some cases had better equipment or laps. But again, time is money, and the cutter's cutting based on what the boss wants, right? So you can also see the meets don't meet. Sometimes they're overcut. What should happen in great cutting is the top of the V from one row will just kiss the bottom of the V from the next row of facets. But again, this is average, it's what's in the stores. So for those of us who cut stones, there's no comparison, but you need to know that many consumers are not going to know just how much better the gemstones you cut and polish are from a commercially cut stone unless you educate them. So, and that's why, in this case, that's why I consider this, and don't mind buying it when the price is right, to use it as a preform, because I'm going to cut and polish it completely differently. So I'm going to cut a new oval gemstone. So to cut a new gemstone, I'm going to need a gem cutting diagram. And I showed you in a previous video and videos on how to read gem cutting diagrams. So I'd refer you to those videos for a more detailed explanation on particularly the length to width ratio and the height to width ratio, because I measured the length and width and height and width of this gemstone, and the height from the top of the stone, the table, down to that cloudy mess in the Pavilion. Because that way that tells me the height to width ratio that I need in the design so that I can cut out that cloudy mess and get rid of it that's in the Pavilion. I also know that the original gemstone length to width is 1.25. The length is 1.25 times the width. That's important to know because I want to keep that same ratio, because even though I'm going to cut out a lot of weight and cut out a lot of that bottom part of the stone, I want to keep the length and the width. So if you took this stone out of a pendant and I recut it, I'd lose a lot of weight, but it'd go right back into that pendant if I kept the length to width ratio the same, and that's what I want to do. So I got to find a design that has the same length to width ratio, so I won't lose much of the length to width. So I'll search for a gem cutting diagram in the website facettingdiagrams.org. And I previously discussed all the other websites that you might search for cutting instructions. I wish they were all in one place, but today I'm just using the database in facettingdiagrams.org. And I'm going to search for a diagram that has both a length to width ratio of about 1.25 and a height to width ratio of about 50.55. It can cut that bottom part of that pavilion out. And I have covered this step before, but I'll explain to you briefly as what I'm doing as I search facetdiagrams.org database. I set the shape to oval so that I only see oval diagrams. I set the index gear to 96 because that's the index gear in my machine. I have other index gears, but I don't want to spend time changing them. And not to mention that the overwhelming majority of designs found online are for the 96 tooth index gear. I check only show open designs because it's not much use for me to find a design where the creator has not chosen to release the cutting instructions into the public domain. I can't cut it, right? So I only want to see open designs. I change the results to 1,000 per page so that basically all the open source oval gem cutting diagrams will show up on one page. Then I hit search, and you can see that there's 238 different gem cutting diagrams in this database, oval, for me to search through for the perfect oval design. Now I could have put in the height to width or length to width ratios in the search, but I didn't want, if I put 1.25 for length to width and it's 1.24, it won't show up. So I leave those blank. If I put height to width of 0.55, then 0.56 won't show up. So I left those blank. And you can see that there are some that have height to width ratios as high as 0.9, very deep, and I don't want that. Again, I've got to cut out the inclusion, so I need a more shallow of a pavilion. And you can see over the years, a lot of talented gem cutters have selflessly donated their gem cutting diagrams to this database for all cutters to use. Now, right now, the United States Fasteners Guild is working to transfer these diagrams to the U.S. Fasteners Guild website and database. That way, they remain always free to use and in one place, and it ensures that the designs will survive over time. But that's an ongoing effort with the USFG. And so just in a couple of minutes, I found a design that I think will work fine. It's created in 2004. It's by Jim Perkins, who's a very well-known gem cutter. It has the right measurements or ratios for what I believe I need. It's called Fancy Oval Split Main Butterfly Pavilion. It's got the right height to width ratio and the right length to width ratio. And here's the cutting instructions. And I can now download this file into my GemCut Studio software, or GCS, and that allows me to look at, more closely examine the design and look at some other factors, lighting, brightness, shadow, head shadow, windowing, and those things. But this design will work, so let's start cutting. Okay, so I've gone over our Topaz with a 320 grit topper, and I just went over the first line of instruction, the P1 line, to cut at the number 2 tooth, the 46, 50, and 94 teeth, so 4 facets. And I cut it down until I got rid of all that junk that was in the bottom. So you can, there's a little inclusion there, but the next cut will come in like this, and get rid of that, and then the next cuts will clean that up. And then as I use finer and finer laps, some more will come up. The other thing I would note is I have not this did not come down below the former girdle, so the width of the stone is not changed. So I haven't lost at this point any length or width of our gemstone. I just lost weight and kind of balanced it up. You can even see here where it was, the stone's not symmetrical in the native cut. But I would say that probably the person that cut this was probably an expert cutter, but just cutting to maintain carat weight, and did a great job, but didn't have equipment enough to, make perfect, polish the facets up really well, or to make the stone symmetrical. But that's not what the owner of the gemstone wanted, so that's what he got what he wanted. So anyway, it's coming along nicely. So I'll continue on I'll probably do the next tier, the next row with my 320, and then I'll probably switch to a 600 grit topper. Toppers are inexpensive laps, pretty much disposable. But at the rougher grits, they work fine. They're a little bit wobbly, and I wouldn't use them at the finest grits, but at the rougher grits, they work fine. So let me continue on with our gemstone, which is on a diet now. It's lost some weight, but it hasn't lost any of its length to width. So if it was put into a gemstone, it would be a little lighter than it used to be. Okay, so I've gone over our stone with my 12M lap, which is about a 1500 grit. And often with Topaz and with quartz, with my 12M, it gets a little bit contaminated every once in a while. Pick up a piece of the gemstone into the lap and cause scratching, which is what happened here. You see those scratches. So I had to stop and clean my lap. And for a metal lap, different laps I clean with different techniques, but for a metal lap, the way I clean it is with a product known as Bartender's Friend. It's like a powdered cleaner, Bartender's Friend, with a scouring pad, a Scotch-Brite pad, or Dawn detergent and a scouring pad. In this case, I used both. Took a while to get it cleaned up, but I am going to have to go back and clean out those scratches. And again, I take good notes now of each stone as I cut it and polishing it, and I've gone back and looked, and it's often with Topaz and quartz that this occurs. And again, I think it's due to the material. Quartz and Topaz like to scratch their own gemstones. So now I'm going to use my, I was going to go to an 8,000 grit diamond on a bat lap, but I think I'm going to go to a 3,000 grit because I still have to move some facets. This design is great in that as long as you do your meet points, your girdle will meet exactly right, and that will level things out. But it's not quite level here, so that's due to not quite meeting here, not quite meeting here, which is due to using a rougher lap. Now as I go to a 3,000 grit, it'll tighten things up even more, and I'll get my my length to width right, my girdle right, and my butterfly facets right. So it's a good design for making sure your length and width works out perfectly. I'm liking the design, and I'll continue to work on it. Okay, I've got everything preformed, and I've started working on the first two facets. The center two, you can see they're shinier. I've used those with the 3,000 grit diamond on a bat lap. So everything's preformed. Now I'll go over it with 3,000 grit, preform it, pre-polish it, and then we'll go to polish. Okay, Topaz is pretty well pre-polished with 3K diamond on a bat lap. And I normally would go to polish. However, in my notes on Topaz, of the Topaz I've cut before, I'm starting to take good notes of what I cut. I have had problems polishing when I go from a 3K to polish for Topaz for some reason. If I go from an 8K to polish, I don't have a problem polishing. So it seems like that step from a 3K is just not quite pre-polished enough for me, for Topaz, at least with other Topaz. So I'm going to go ahead, instead of going to polish, I've got time, so I'm just going to go over this one more time with 8K diamond on a zinc lap, and then go to polish. Okay, I finished polishing up our Topaz, and I used 60,000 grit diamond on a zinc lap. Didn't have any problems polishing it because I did a good pre-polish. So now I'm going to transfer our stone and cut and polish the upper half, or the crown. Okay, I haven't shown you how I transfer my stones in a while, so I'll go through it this time. So this is my one of my transfer jigs. And for this stone, I'm going to use a V-shaped cone in the bottom because there's a keel all along the bottom of this stone. So that'll work nicely. So I align the stone and then I move the top part up and I'm going to put my glue here to hold the stone. So what I'm going to, I normally, for about 90% of the stones I cut now, I use UV activated super glue, UV light activated super glue, which works great. But for some of the larger stones that I cut, I'm still using two-part epoxy. This is the hardener, and this is the resin, and I'm going to use that for this stone, although I think at some point I'm going to try out my UV light activated super glue and see if it works on these larger stones, but for now I'll use my two-part epoxy. So what I do is I get a old business card from my wife's store, BOPIE'S. Then you want to mix the two-part epoxy into about a 50-50 mix and just eyeball it. There's no scientific way to get exactly 50%. You don't need it. And if you get bubbles in it, it's no problem. Again, none of that is any issue at all, so don't worry about it. So I generally put the hardener down first, the resin down first, and then the hardener last, but it doesn't make any difference. Again, you just want a 50-50 mix. So what I do is I make 2 puddles and about the same size. The first puddle is going to set a little bit, so it's going to get a little bit bigger. But in general, you're just looking for 2 puddles about the same size. That's a 50-50 mix. That's close enough. It'll work fine. Then I take a bamboo skewer from the grocery store, which these were long skewers, and I cut them into three each. And you just mix it up. Once you start mixing your epoxy, you have about a couple of minutes to put it onto your stone before it starts setting up. Still plenty of time, no need to panic. And you want to mix it up really good. Then you just start putting the epoxy onto our dot, making sure that we have epoxy all over the bottom part of the dot that's going to attach to the stone. You don't want the epoxy running down your dot, or you'll have problems getting it into your quill, of course. So then you gently push your stone onto the epoxy, tighten it up, let gravity do its thing, turn the stone over maybe, because you want some of the epoxy to run onto the stone. You can add a little bit more epoxy, no problem at this point. You want epoxy part way down the stone, but not over the girdle. You don't want to be cutting through epoxy. Okay, we've got enough epoxy everywhere. So now you probably will need to turn the stone over a couple of times before the epoxy settles. You just got to keep an eye on it so that it doesn't run down, certainly not any lower than your top part of your dop. And about every 30 seconds or so, you just turn it over for the first couple of minutes and watch the epoxy so it doesn't, in this case you don't want it going down into the girdle, but this will ensure a nice amount of epoxy throughout the stone. So then once it's set up, after a couple of minutes, I set it aside for a day or so and come back to it. So I've got some other stones to work on, so I'll work on another stone and then come back to the stone tomorrow. Okay, once we transfer our stone, we want to put it back into our spindle, and we want to make sure that it's aligned properly so that the top and the bottom facets will match. So the way you do that is you pick some facets on the girdle and you line them up. So when we cut the stone, the G1 line of instruction had us cutting the girdle at the 2, the 94, and the 46 and 50 index teeth. So the 46 and 50 index tooth is the 46 and the 50. So what you want to do, you could either take the 94 and the 2 index teeth or the 46 and the 50. I'll just work it with the 46 and the 50. So we put our index tooth at the 50. Now, again, we're going to measure both the 46 and the 50. We're going to make sure we're in alignment because those two facets are what aligns the stone. If there had been facets at the 96, 24, 72, and 48 and 72, we could have just used one facet. So, but it's important for the 50 and the 46 to bring the stone like that, 50 and 46. You don't want to say this is the 50 and then the 46. You don't want to say this is the 50 and then when you go back to the 46 you're way off. So you measure both, you check both the 46 and the 50, and the way you check it is you put it at your index at either the 46 and the 50, and you line it up. You put a precision block, which Ultratech gives you. This is my precision block. You put it on your flattest lap. In my case, it's my ceramic lap. And then I have another precision block that I bought on Amazon just to raise things up, because you're going to set the stone at the top and it raises up, and I'm going to put my head in here with my 10 power loop, 20 power loop in my case, to make sure that the facet is flush with the precision block. Okay, because this gemstone's large, the facets are large, it's easier for you to see how we do this. So as you lower the machine, you're just looking right here, and you want that you see the light, you want it to the facet to be aligned so that light comes across all across the facet at the same time. If you were to set your facet like this, where the light, this part of the facet's flush, but this part's not, and if you were to tighten it up and start cutting, you would be out of alignment. So you just make sure you're all the way across that facet. Then you just tighten the dop retention screw. And again, because the the facets that make up the four sides are not four facets. It's not the 96, the 24, 48, and 72, but it's two facets on each side. In this case, the 46 and 50, because that's the case, you want to double check that you're at the index tooth. In this case, the index tooth is the 50 index tooth. We also want to check at the 46 to make sure we didn't misalign those four facets. And in this case, we are in alignment, so we can start cutting the upper half of our gemstone. Okay, I've used my 320 grit topper and basically preformed the entire upper half of our stone, which greatly reduced the size of that the table will be on this stone with this design, which I like, because this design has the table will come down a little lower, but there'll be kind of like a picture frame around the table, which those of you that watch some of my other videos know I like. I like having a kind of a step cut at the very end and making almost a picture frame for my table. So now I'll go over the stone again, but this is basically, I need to bring the girdle down a little bit, make it a little smaller girdle, although this is fine because it's a large stone. It's a larger girdle than I like. So I'll probably bring it down to about 0.5 millimeters. But I'll continue working on our gemstone. Now what I do when I'm working with my steel laps, just talking about the steel laps with diamond embedded, like the toppers, the 320, my 600, my 12M, 600 grit toppers, 600 grit steel laps, all those steel laps, when I'm done working on them, I spin dry them, but I also go over them with lava soap. I make basically 3 runs over them, and that seems to take out any of the swarf embedded in the lap. And then I just spin dry it and put it away. It's ready for the next usage. So again, I use lava soap. That's what other cutters have recommended. Notice here, lava soap in the U.S. is owned and made, by the company WD-40, which is the same company that makes, of course, WD-40, the kind of oil that some people use. For our friends in Australia, they used to have a product called Solvol that was also pumice from volcanoes, but no longer made, no longer available. Sorry for my Australian friends, but the thing I would note at one time, and it just went off the market the last few years ago, and what happened was the company that owned it said that it was not economical to make, which is, we should take heart and listen to that in the U.S. because WD-40 company. Same company owns Solvol and discontinued it, that owns lava soap, so WD-40. So anyway, we currently have lava soap available, and it's been around for a very long time. Actually, I picked up an old bar of lava soap just because I saw it. I thought it was kind of cool. And the thing that's kind of funny about it is it's from the 50s or 60s, but it came with instructions on how to use. It looks more like, the old lava looks more like Solvol does now, the color, but had instructions with it telling people how to use it, whereas today when we sell things like our Tide Pods and other types of soap today. We have instructions in them too, but not so much telling people how to use them and get the most out of them, but just tell dummies not to eat them. So times have changed a little bit. All right, let's go back to cutting. So when lava first came out, or nearly after it first came out, takes the dirt, protects the skin. It was by Procter & Gamble, so at one time, Reach Active Lather, make sinks, bathtubs, woodwork, and enamel shine, so it removes grease, grime, rust, oil, any from household stains from hands, face, and body without harm to delicate skin. So lava soap's been around for quite a while. Okay, I finished polishing the upper half of our Topaz with a zinc lap and a 60,000 grit diamond bat stick. So I still have to cut the table. Now I do like this design, as I said earlier, because it gives me kind of a picture frame, and that's the frame here that the table will go over. I like that. So if you're wondering about this roughed up part, so this on the top, that's the original table from the original stone. And then this last angle, the last tier, the last row of cuts goes from here all the way up. But most of these angles were at 24.04 degrees and 2 of them were at 20 degrees. So what I did is I didn't want to have to polish all that material when I'm going to cut all the way down to here anyway to make the table. So after I went around those facets, that tier, that row, I used I lowered the angle, so if it was 24 degrees, I used 20 degrees, and if it was 2 of the facets were 20 degrees, I used 18 degrees, just to cut at a lower angle so they're out of the way. So I didn't end up touching them when I polished the other facets. That's why I did that. So now I will cut and polish the table. Okay, got the table all polished up, so now I'll put our gemstone into acetone to get rid of the adhesive, and we'll weigh it and measure this whopper and send it off to BOPIE. So today I finished cutting, or you may say recut, a very large blue topaz. Now the vendor calls it Swiss blue. I think it's Swiss blue. BOPIE feels it's London blue. Either way, it's a blue topaz, so I'll call it blue topaz. I purchased it in Tucson at essentially the same price that I can buy topaz rough for, due to the cloudy inclusion in the pavilion of this stone that made it basically unsellable. So I did lose some weight, as the original gemstone had a deep pavilion, but maximizing weight was not the goal. In fact, I wanted to cut out some of that pavilion. I did want to retain as much of the original length and width. That was important, and I did manage to do that. I showed you in this video how to use the gem cutting diagram, faceteddiagrams.org, to search for designs with the height and width ratio that I needed. Again, to reduce that pavilion size of the original gemstone and cut out that cloudiness. The design I selected also had a length-width ratio equal to the original gemstone, so I didn't lose much length or width in the gemstone. I was really surprised. And I think the new gemstone that I cut is much more attractive than the original stone, but I'll leave that up to you. Let me know in the comments what you think. I didn't really have any issues cutting or polishing this topaz. Topaz cuts and polishes, no problem, except I will say that with stones, large stones with large tables, as a rule, it takes a lot more time to polish the table, a large table on a large stone. But that's a rule, and this stone just was no exception to that. It did take a while to polish the table. But please let me know in the comments what you think of this gemstone and of the design. And as always, happy fasting, everyone.